All right, so I told you I'm a CBT nerd or a cognitive behavioral therapy nerd, so I want to start a little bit with it's just some roots. Um, Guy, can folks hear me and see what I see?
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So a guy named Aaron Beck in the late 50s, early 60s, basically is working with depressed patients, and he realizes that their body language kind of changes in session, and he notices that they're becoming dysregulated, and Dr. Beck was kind of wondering, what was going through his patients' minds, and it seemed like, and he found was that they were making all sorts of assumptions and interpretations of negative interpretations of the therapist, or thinking that the therapist was thinking badly of something. And he noticed that depressed patients were just notorious for these thinking errors, and he started to challenge these distortions, and really sort of work with his patients to figure out what the thought process was, and then reality test them. So change them in real time. So if he noticed that his patient, if the patient had an assumption, that they didn't, they didn't like the therapy, Dr. Beck would kind of say, okay, what's the evidence, right? And kind of look at it, and allow the client to do that reality check. So, he talked about sort of, these interpretations and these sort of automatic negative thoughts, ants. We know ants from David has brought them up, and I think Judy, and, we've talked about them. And basically a big part of this presentation is going to be sort of the negative, being able to link when we see negative emotion with our clients and when they're dysregulated, what is the thought process, and what are those ants that are logically linked? So he's noticed a huge reduction in distress for his patients when they were able to sort of correct those thinking errors. I wanted to give some basic assumptions about the CBT model. This is kind of like more from a textbook, and if you're interested in sort of looking at it more from an academic standpoint, but while these won't have huge implications for our sessions with clients, I think it's worth noting CBT is highly collaborative. There's a huge, the relationship between client and therapist and coach is a huge part of the outcomes and the positive changes that occur. So you want to make sure that you have a really strong relationship with your client before you're doing some of these CBT. But if it's done more traditionally in a therapeutic context, you really want to make sure that you're working collaboratively and not sort of taking that like kind of hierarchical position. Traditionally, cognitive therapy is short term. The idea is essentially to put coaches or therapists out of a job. We're teaching our clients how to learn how to use these strategies so that eventually they can articulate this, they can lead and guide some of the session. And it's maybe later on there are some booster sessions. Again, this is more if it was a more traditional therapy. But the idea is that it's usually it's like a 10 sessions, right? It's very structured. There is an agenda setting, there's pacing. CBT involves interruptions of the client, which I'm terrible at. Like just being able to, because it's really skill oriented, and our clients go on tangents. They're chatty, and you want to make sure that you have a sound alliance to be able to interrupt clients and say, hey, I love the direction you're going in. We said we were going to go in this direction, though. Let's put it on the agenda. We'll discuss this, then we'll cover what you want. So, there is the structuredness to it. CBT is very present oriented, which is why it's one of my favorite models. You talk about, Freud, the, subconscious, the unconscious, and, a therapist the therapist in a chair, client on the couch. There's a a real emphasis on, those early life encounters. But CBT, although focuses on some of those encounters, it's really about current thinking patterns, current beliefs, and how to sort of, catch, evaluate and replace some of those unhelpful thoughts or unhelpful beliefs. At the core of cognitive therapy is the cognitive model. This is really the heart of a lot of the work that I do with my clients. And really this idea, if we can change how we think, we can change how we feel. I think there's a lot of power in that idea. And essentially, right, we want to, be able to help clients realize the logical connection between their thinking patterns and how they're feeling. And if you can do that in session, and you see clients that have like negative emotion, or you can see that their body language changes, if you can kind of tap into what they are thinking in real time, you can help them replace and modify their thoughts to feel better in session. And hopefully they'll be doing this in between sessions. A quick example just of the cognitive model, right? Again, this logical link between what we think, how we feel, and how we act. So suppose kiddo's working on science homework. He runs into a bump and is getting frustrated. He's starting to think that this is going to take me hours. And then maybe he starts to take that a little bit deeper and say, like, I'm going to just do badly in my quiz tomorrow, right? And then it's causing him to start to get emotional, and the emotions tend to dominate. And then the next thing you know, he's resuming his video game, and the textbook's in the trash. Now, this is obviously like I had the time to really make this an example that shows this connection, but or this sort of logical connection between everything. But this can be super important to our clients, because again, let's see if we can get at the thoughts right before we get to that emotional reaction. And maybe if the client was able to do kind of like what I was talking about, how Dr. Beck would help clients see that connection and correct those assumptions that he's making, maybe the book maybe he wouldn't become dysregulated, or maybe she would have the ability to go back to the assignment and look at it. Again, these are distorted assumptions, right? I'll probably do badly on the quiz tomorrow. Why bother? So again, we look at the negative emotion, and we kind of try to go back and see what's the preceding thought process. Similar example, kiddo on bus ride home starts ruminating about, I got to tell my mom, these grades, and, they're gonna, it's not going to be good enough, right? Their parents set such rigid standards. And we're going to talk about how environment and early life experiences influences the way that we think and what we believe. But this plays out with our clients. They just start to think about it, and before they even walk through the door to be, to be unloaded on, they've already got their head down, because they're already predicting how it's going to go. And maybe it doesn't go that way, but you see the power of believing what you think, right? And if we could get at some of these thoughts in the moment, maybe we can get some sort of like some symptom relief. Again, we can see this kind of connection. So it makes good sense. If we're talking about thoughts and emotions and their connection between each other, we got to define both of them. In cognitive therapy, automatic thoughts are defined as unpreventable, quickly occurring ideas that go through our mind. This could be a statement, I can't do this, or it could be like appear in imagery form, where like a client pictures, maybe, their family room, and, it's overcrowded, and, they're about to have a conversation, they're thinking of sort of how the interaction is going to play out. Bottom line is some clients have their thoughts in imagery form, and some clients kind of tend to have more thoughts. A lot of people tend to have both, although the images are much harder to do. This is a little nuanced, but the images are much harder to elicit. It's easier for clients to try and get at what their thoughts are. One thing to just keep in mind too is that like thoughts, if we have a thought that goes through our head, like, this isn't going to work out, that's a statement, right? Whereas an emotion is one word. We're going to cover that. But thoughts could also be one word, because the meaning attached to what clients are thinking may be like, shoot. And then in their head, they're thinking, I left the door unlocked. So it could be in a sentence form. So if we're trying to draw these out, or it could just be like an idea, and asking our client, okay, well, what's the meaning of that? It's like, oh, I wasn't able to do this. 80,000 thoughts it's predicted that go through our mind during the day, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. So again, there's lots of opportunities, especially for our clients who have emotional disorders such as anxiety and depression. There's tons of opportunities to challenge the ants. This is a critical point. Emotions tend to dominate. So what happens is that we get these automated thoughts that go through our head, and we don't really pay attention to them unless we're consciously taught these skills and we're thinking about them, because you get caught in the emotion. And what we're doing, right, we're teaching clients to be able to take a step back and evaluate what was going through your mind right before the emotion. Because again, these thoughts are quick. They're usually accepted as true. They go unchallenged. And we can see why that would be problematic if a client's making all these distorted, guesses about what's going on, and they're feeling worse, right? Their mood can go from 0 to 100 pretty quickly. So like I said, emotional disordered clients tend to have a rapid fire of these ants. Let's see here. Ants can be, there are, automatic negative thoughts can be distorted in that, they're making maybe a client's making an assumption like the coach is mad at them, which is a distorted thought if it's not true. But it could also be, it could look a little bit differently. And I believe that's the next slide. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Super, super important here. We can always point this out to our clients. Thoughts are not necessarily facts. It doesn't mean what you're thinking is always untrue. It doesn't mean what you're thinking is always true. It depends. But often, because clients tend to accept their thoughts as reality, there is this tendency to assume what they're thinking is factual, and that is not the case. So just a little question here that I feel was relevant. Can people without anxiety or depression have ants? And the answer is absolutely. But again, our clients with emotional disorders are more susceptible to them. Again, not all ants can be irrational. Suppose somebody has a negative emotion because they think that they have like 3 months to live, and they just, received this, news from their doctor. And you're in session, and you say what's going through your mind, and they tell you this, and then you start to challenge that. We don't want to challenge. That's a rational thought, because that's the truth, right? So maybe what we look at is, how is that thought? What's the link between that thought and how the client's feeling? So we come at it from not a standpoint of changing the thought, but raising the awareness that, well, how is that thought in this moment? We talk about the cognitive triangle. How is that thought in this moment making you feel? And, maybe the client says, oh, it's making me feel terrible. And then said, well, maybe you say, well, why do you keep hitting yourself over the head with it? What can you do in the now? How can we change the thought process in the now, so that maybe the next 3 months are more meaningful than you may expect? Or maybe, we can sort of really trying to, get at that. Again, if a client hits themselves over the head with thoughts continually, I mean, that's dysfunctional. So again, they don't need to be distorted. It's really, the big thing is just pointing out to our clients how their thoughts and their emotions are connected. Cognitive distortions, I wanted to be thorough and give as far as cognitive therapy goes, this is a term you hear a lot. These are thoughts. Cognitive distortions are thoughts. They're just common ones associated with emotional disorders. Some of these you guys are going to be able to, call out and recognize with our clients. This is my personal favorite because it's the most common, I think. Catastrophizing, or in other words, awfulizing. The tendency to make a mountain out of a molehill, to exaggerate the, how bad something is. Like, again, we talked earlier about the kiddo, who says, I'm gonna fail the quiz. Maybe they start to ruminate and think, I'm gonna fail the class. And then it's like, hold on, right? Let's look at this objectively, right? Without putting the interpretation on it. You didn't do your homework, okay? What can you do next, right? And again, by trying to help them modify their thinking, the idea is hopefully they'll feel better and come to a less disastrous conclusion. All or nothing thinking, we call this black and white thinking on extremes. It's either good or bad. This can be a really common one if clients are, they score low, like if their parents are always hammering in their head, like, you got to score 85, 90, and the kid gets an 82 and they say, I'm a failure. And it's like, well, actually, no, you actually scored pretty well. It sounds like maybe your expectations, were high, right? And just being able to show that things exist on a spectrum. It's not one or the other. Personalization. This is very common with folks who have depression, is to just sort of internalize blame. You don't have to have depression to do this, because it happens a lot to all of us. If if a parent discontinues services and we say, shoot, I should have been able to do more. Or maybe we think, like, that we start to, replay the last interactions, like, what, I shouldn't have said this. And it's like, well, wait, we let's look at sort of all of the things that are contributing to that decision and do that reality test before we attach personal blame. Mind reading or fortune telling, predicting the future negatively, assuming somebody else's intentions. These are the big ones that happen a lot. You're going to find your clients mind reading. I find it, especially adolescents, they'll mind read and assume what they know what their peers are thinking. And again, what we think we become, right? So if I'm thinking that the kid didn't want to speak to me because, my hair looked dumb, I'm going to believe that. But if we can call those distortions out while they're happening, maybe we can, create some space between, that jump to assume that, the person did something, there was something negative about them. Ignoring the evidence. This is pretty much like, if you have a belief, that, like, your friend did something that was, your friend didn't text you because they wanted nothing to do with you. Maybe, we point out that, well, did you consider alternatively, maybe their phone died, or, maybe they're, this person's been kind of like, a little flaky in the past, and they say, no, they don't like, it's because of this, right? So that's kind of ignoring the evidence. Awesome list of cognitive distortions that I forgot to point out here. So all of this stuff is uploaded on the drive. And again, I'll answer any questions, and, we can discuss. You can look and see sort of what these common thinking errors are, so we can help our clients really name them when they're happening. I said we were going to define thought and emotion. Emotions, typically one word, right? Mad, glad, sad, different than a thought, which is an idea, right? And it's usually a sentence. Again, I talked about how emotions dominate. So emotions make it difficult to evaluate the thoughts. I sent a text a little while ago talking about this idea, right? So emotions thrive on negative thinking. So really, what determines whether an emotion persists is not is really the thoughts that are in somebody's head. And you can really, I mean, maybe even you're just, you call out and say, I'm going to stop thinking about that. And you do an activity, right? That's a great intervention, right? Even though it's kind of avoiding it, we know that with the cognitive triangle, because there's such a strong link between in the moment, what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling, you can occupy your mind with something else, or you can distract yourself and go do, that's why it's great to figure out what are some of these kids' hobbies, what are their passions, how can we basically get you out of your head? Negative emotions are a signal that automatic negative thoughts have occurred. So we really want to kind of use that when we see that in session. I feel like I'm yelling. Am I yelling?
No.
Honey, am I yelling? Okay. So, that's a great cue. When we see negative emotion, to really say, not necessarily, identify that the client's distressed, but then, really sort of think about what are the thinking patterns. It can be useful to scale emotions. Usually emotions that rate higher are associated with more dysfunctional thoughts. Usually, not always. Somebody may be really, really, anxious, and there may not be a clear, distorted thought. But it's good to be able to operationalize the emotions either with words or with numbers. And again, we talked about thought usually preceding emotion, and that idea that should, when we see that, will prompt further questioning. I'll get to that in a second. Do all thoughts result in emotion and behavior? Not necessarily. The cognitive model in some ways is an oversimplification. You could have you could think of somebody like throwing a football and their dad catches it, and the person thinks, oh, like I have a great arm, and then they started with the behavior of actually doing action, and then they had the thought. So sometimes it can be in different orders, but I would say 65% of the time there's a preceding thought. We're not trying to eliminate all of our clients' distress. Emotions are cues that something's up, and maybe in some ways, this whole threat with the virus, we want to have some anxiety, right? There is a threat, but is it getting excessive? Am I catastrophizing, or am I not considering other alternatives, and is the distress becoming over the top? Okay, so again, thought causes emotion. How does this help me in any way in session, right? Okay, so this may be repetitive at this point, but that's good, because this is a really great skill. We notice a shift in our client's body language. This could be increased volume in their voice, obviously. This could be shifting positions, and it's kind of like a negative or a passive body language. Those are signals. Those are good signals to guess. There's a good chance that there were just there was probably some negative thought going on. So really what we're doing is we're helping our clients catch the thought. We're not modifying or replacing the thought yet. We're not using different coping interventions yet. We're literally we're just trying to support our clients in being able to label what the thought is. And really, it can stop there. You don't necessarily need to do more. By labeling the thought objectively, some clients will be able to almost instantly realize that they're overthinking and notice a relief in their emotion. Experiencing thoughts and emotions as they are, what's mindful, and right, just objectively naming what's going on, right? Just in a neutral sort of way is, can keep us from making those assumptions that may not be accurate, right? It's like, just kind of, just narrate, and maybe a client can just narrate out loud what's going through their mind in a neutral voice instead of judging it. That can maybe help them sort of, have a more adaptive response or emotional reaction. There are a ton of tools to help with this. The main one is the automatic thought record, and this is basically the tool that can help clients record the situation, what was going on, then discuss the emotion, and then the thought, and sort of how they're interconnected. This is like when you talk about CBT, the automatic thought record is one of the go-to tools. This is what they look like. This is a little bit of a simplified one. I like this because it uses the catching. It's a little more kid-friendly. But again, right, we're just breaking down, and this is a fairly sophisticated thing to do. So you may need to help clients through this process. But again, right, rating the emotion, talking about the thought or the image, and then what's the associated situation. We know that many of our clients have, struggle with metacognition, and we know that, adults, there's a lot of people in general who just aren't very good at naming what their thoughts are. There are strategies to support that, but just keep in mind that if you're, this has happened to me sometime in session. I'll keep trying to elicit the thought, and they're just not getting it, and including after using a lot of these tools that I put here to help clients catch the thought, it's just there's something going on, and maybe they're just really not able to label their thought, and then you may respond accordingly. Okay, so we talked about catching the thought, right? Now let's talk about interventions or things to do once we've caught it. This is what is called cognitive restructuring. And a basic definition, cognitive restructuring is an umbrella term that refers to methods that help people think differently about an event. In a broad sense, the term cognitive restructuring could apply to anything or inside or outside of therapy that promotes cognitive change. So, these are the strategies, these are the coping mechanisms to deal with whatever that upsetting thought or emotion is. This could be something, that's, you could be in session and help a client identify their thought and maybe replace the unhelpful one with a more helpful one. But it may not be even that. It could be like going to throw a football, right? If a client's dysregulated and they can take that pause and throw a football and experience, relief and get out of that fight or flight, then, if you ask me, that's cognitive restructuring. It doesn't have to be this grand, sophisticated thingy like all these thingies. These are other forms of cognitive restructuring. I'm going to go through some of them, my personal favorites. I'm going to upload a video of this presentation with using QuickTime, and I'm going to go through these. But just, for the purpose of now, we talked about some of the easy ones of naming cognitive distortions. That's a great one. You don't really need a ton of CBT expertise to be able to just help clients, pinpoint what those are. Some clients benefit from just learning about anxiety and depression, right? So maybe they're really distressed because they notice that they have this tendency to always exaggerate the danger of something. And, you tell them that that's actually fairly common for people with anxiety. And maybe they get some relief just in knowing that. I've talked about how the emotion dominates. And some of these interventions are very simple, and they're deceivingly simple. It's actually a risk to not using them because, again, some clients, not only are they maybe not aware of their thoughts, they don't identify it and then take the second to actually think of a rational way of dealing with it. So, for example, if somebody's saying that, if they're having a negative thought, you ask them to, decatastrophizing, right? Decatastrophizing is such a fancy word to say, basically, what's the worst case scenario? Catastrophizing is assuming the worst, decatastrophizing, let's draw out that worst case scenario. Maybe the client says, well, I won't do well on the test. And then you say, well, why is that so, how bad is that? And it's like, maybe they can come to the conclusion that they are, doing fairly okay in the class, and it's not really going to hit their grade that much. And that actually makes them feel better in the moment, but they didn't stop to make that connection they didn't play it out. Right. Some of these are kind of fun. The cognitive wager. If a client has they're predicting a negative outcome, ask them to take how much cash, right, out of their pocket would they bet that this negative outcome will happen. Sometimes that can be enough to create a distance between the problem, and the client says, well, gee, I probably wouldn't bet that much money. And then you say, that's interesting. So you wouldn't bet a lot of money, right? But you're so convinced that this is true. So again, you could sort of try and point that out. Classic CBT intervention here, examining the evidence, right? You hear about, well, what's the evidence to support? So if a client has a thought like, their friend's mad at them, right? Okay, well, what's the evidence to support that? We want to be somewhat validating. We don't want to say, no, that's not true. They're not mad at you. What's the evidence? I imagine you have some good reason, right? So, and then you try it. But again, those exceptions to that belief or that narrative are difficult to access. So you got to make sure that we're also helping the client look at something. Okay, well, what's the evidence to go against that? Well, she's flaky, and her executive functioning's bad, and her phone probably wasn't charged or something. So again, maybe you notice a little symptom relief as the client's able to, in the moment, recognize that it's not just the negative, right? It's that they couldn't access the exception to that because they were too caught up in the emotion. I think that's all I want to say about the cognitive restructuring techniques. There's some really great ones. Oh, one more. The simplest one. I love this one. What should you do, right? This is elusive for some of our clients, right? Maybe they don't know what to do, but maybe they think that they need to do something that's like, this huge big thing, and maybe what they need to do is to do nothing. Maybe they need to mentally rehearse. I'm going to go home and I'm going to sit and do my work, and I'm not going to message this friend or reach out for the rest of the day. And then now that they've mentally rehearsed and made that plan, there's less uncertainty. Okie dokie. All right. So tying this all together, right? We noticed the shift in body language. We're trying to help them point out that connection between thought process and emotion, and then we're using one of these cognitive structure techniques. I want to point out this example. This is something that I do very commonly with my clients. This one is more about like if you notice the body language shift, but sometimes you don't, and sometimes you just maybe you can just tell that or a client tells you that they're really anxious and they can't identify the thought, and so I'm just going to read this out loud. So client says, I'm feeling really stressed out. Coach says, let's flush out and write down all the problems that are going through that have been going on recently. Because again, we're trying to figure out and what is the most troubling, and maybe it's a distorted thought that they're having, and that we can correct the thinking error. So let's kind of unpack some of this. Well, we'll rate the problems 0 to 5 to give us, so we can prioritize our time. Start with the ones that's most troubling. So in this example, the client externalizes. And then starting with the most troubling problem, what are the thoughts that you're having about this? So we're talking about the thoughts associated with the problem. Client externalizes all the possible problems. Coach searches for any ants that could be contributing to client distress. Here, it can be really helpful to continue to ask clients, really, what are some other thoughts you're having about the situation? Because you may find that clients you may think you found what's the root of the main source of their distress. But if you keep asking them, well, what else are you thinking about this? And then maybe, you find out, that they're having, they're really just, they're really anxious, but they can't figure it out, that, they hate their seating assignment. So instead of, trying to, help the client, using a cognitive restructuring strategy, maybe just emailing a teacher requesting a new seat would have been more effective. No discussion of CBT is complete without talking about beliefs. Beliefs are what underlie our clients' thoughts, right? So I do want to make a few. I want to say a few things about beliefs, because I think that working on beliefs of clients rather than thoughts can lend itself to the coaching model. It's a little bit. Sorry, did I miss that?
No, you're good.
Okay. It's a little trickier. One reason for that is because these, the beliefs may be associated with traumas, and if you evaluate those beliefs, you open the wound, you got to be able to stitch it back up. And sometimes that's not feasible in the session, or maybe the coach or the client or the therapist doesn't have the experience to do that. So it's not that you don't want to explore these. It's just, you want to just do it carefully. Beliefs, just like thoughts or ideas, they may or may not be true. This is so huge. Beliefs are learned. They do not exist at birth. So if a client believes that they're no good, they learned that somewhere. That's a rule that they've processed something and come to that conclusion. So you can try to maybe help clients or find where it originated, that belief, and maybe start to talk about, like, okay, well, was that your fault that you formed that belief? Or maybe you could start to think of the belief in a different way. So it's important to let our clients know that they are learned. Typically beliefs form as a result of events and experiences that occur in our lifetime. Experience, it could be reading a book, it could be watching a show, it could be having a conversation with a school teacher or a conversation with a parent. We're all processing through our own lenses, and our experiences are typically what kind of shape sort of our belief systems. That's kind of a simplification, but it's really sort of how I believe that's sort of really the way it works. So just to keep in mind, just so we're, just to be thorough about the CBT presentation, there's 3 kinds of beliefs. We talked about automatic thoughts, right? Automatic thoughts are beliefs. They're just on the surface. Intermediate beliefs tend to be like rules and assumptions that are related to a client's core belief. Core beliefs are deeply rooted beliefs about the self and our world. Usually these begin in childhood. If you consider sort of how, we think about, a child's underdeveloped brain, they're not really all there, right? So, sweetie, is there any way you could? Okay, so they're not all there. So, kids are usually form, assumptions about, to make sense of some of their experiences. Maybe they decide that the world's a bad place because they had an abusive parent, or maybe that they're not worthy because their parent didn't give them the time of day. And what happens is these strengthen over time. They become reinforced through confirmation bias, right? They ignore the evidence that goes against their beliefs, and all of a sudden, you've got somebody who believes so strongly that they're no good that their thoughts just, it just kind of gets in the way. And just core beliefs, again, are like blueprints, templates, they're lenses. Kind of think of like more metaphors to think about it, but it's basically like information is filtered through our client's core belief. And I'm going to kind of point sort of that out. So beliefs shapes a client in the same way a belief shapes a client's thought process. So there's usually the beliefs are associated with the client's thought process. So for example, a client believes that they're dumb deep down, right? Will likely have thoughts that rise to the surface like, I can't do this. So we want to look at one thing that can be really great, guys, with doing clients, is to just record their thoughts, collect data, see if you can find trends. And because usually the thought content is going to be linked to these deeper underlying beliefs. And if we can start to modify the beliefs, that's where we can kind of get at the root, so to speak. Just something interesting, most clients aren't conscious of these unless they're aware of them, unless they've been in therapy or unless they've really worked at it to try and dig them up. This is an extremely bad picture of this sort of connection, but it's good enough, right, to see that the beliefs and are underneath, and what we're really seeing, well, not actually seeing, but what clients usually can access, hopefully, is the thoughts that are up top. So last slide, really, I love this because it's such an oversimplification, right? Early life experiences, developing beliefs, and now in the here and now, right? Looking at our thoughts. There's this logical connection between it all. I really would love to answer any questions and just see maybe if I can clarify anything or give any more information.
was wondering if there was a hand raising option, but this is not
Oh,
Zoom.
um,
Zoom does not have that.
honestly, like, I mean, people can just kind of like call it out. It's all good. Even if you guys don't have things to say, I'd like it's just so cool to be able to share this stuff. So
I have a question for you. I don't mind starting, Matt, if that's
sure,
okay. So, um, from a
and I'll do my best to answer.
from a CBT perspective, do you ever talk about the mind versus the brain, or do you ever talk about uh, the journey of that? Help. Do you ever talk about mindfulness? Because I feel like there's a.
Oh my god.
I think the hardest part in anything you're talking about is as the deeper kids identify with their thoughts, like the more time they've spent identifying with their thoughts and emotions, the more entrenched they are with that identity, and breaking of that identity becomes super complicated because they almost have to, in a way, kind of kill themselves. Like they have a disassociate with that identity, which can lead to its own challenge. Because if I've always been in chaos and I've always identified with chaos and I find this comfortably numb,
Totally.
kind of relationship with chaos, how do I start to break from it? And you asked a couple good questions, and I'm trying to figure out what my question is really, but uh, is there, how do you find, where do you start with that journey? And is it is it good enough to just tackle and name the thoughts? Is that like, okay, David, stop your overthinking. If you just help your kids name name it to tame it, so to speak. If I can just label the thoughts, that's a step in the right direction.
I mean, that's a win. I mean, sorry, I gotta turn the light on because now you can't really see me. I think label. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean that's still a win if you can do that. Some clients. David, this may not answer your question at all. So maybe I should be a politician. I feel that there are some clients who are more familiar with their thoughts, and but some clients we have to set the bar really, really low. So maybe a win looks different for some person than it does for another person. You touched on mindfulness, such an amazing thing to work on with clients because again, where you're experiencing things in the moment as they are without judgment. As far as the deeper, if they're really entrenched in their thoughts and their beliefs and in their world, it can be a challenge to sort of help them break out of that. But I think the more awareness that they can have, right, the more they can sort of they can kind of notice that there are some trends in their thinking, or they do have some beliefs that are really getting in the way. Being able to just point that out has value. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's maybe I am asking a complicated question. I don't really know how to simplify it, but
Do you want to try again?
I do see. No, I think you did great. Maybe
I'll
I should
try
just
it.
I should stop talking and give someone a chance to ask some questions that actually make sense.
Well, you can ask me later. I'm a nerd about this stuff. Sorry, Courtney, did your hand go up?
Oh, I was just trying to mic myself. One thought that I was wondering, are there any such things as automatic positive thoughts where you catch somebody having positive emotion and then kind of try to help them affirm that feeling and continue those behaviors?
We're such a problem-laden society. The medical model is just so like separated.
Deficit model, yeah.
Like totally. If a client, and that's great to point out too. How does that thought make you feel versus another thought? And then maybe they can point out a more positive thought. Again, there should be that. I have a lot of faith in the cognitive model. So it works both ways. Negative thoughts can cause positive emotion, can cause negative emotions in the same way. Thinking about something from an alternative view that's a little bit more flexible and balanced can improve their mood. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it works all ways.
I have a crazy question. What about people who can't hear their thoughts, who don't actually have that internal voice?
Yeah, it's that's so hard, and I think that's and again, like there's going to be clients who are just either not good at naming their thoughts, or there's just a functional deficit, like they're just not cognitively able to do it.
Is that
To
possible?
answer that to the best of my ability, I would say traditional CBT may not be as effective. I mean, maybe you could help them and work more with the emotion, and just sort of like how they're feeling, and trying to kind of like, you know, gee, Judy, it's tough if a client really isn't so aware, really can't access sort of what their thinking is. Um, my part of my answer is that it could be an obstacle, but I'm not a certified cognitive behavioral therapist. If you want to get somebody really serious about this stuff, you'll see that they were, certified by the, Cognitive Academy, or, anyways, they could probably give you a much more accurate answer. But off the top of my head, I think it's an obstacle if clients are having trouble with thoughts.
Okay, thanks. It was just something I've been recently introduced to, that not all people hear thoughts in their head. So I just thought
Right. And in imagery form is another thing that you can try to hone in on. To my knowledge, I know that, like, thoughts can appear. I mean, thoughts for some people could just have images that pop into their head. Some could be kind of specific thoughts. I do think that there are some resources on the website, or the drive that I shared, that has like working cognitive therapy with kids. I wonder if taking a look, it'd be worth us looking at that to see if there's stuff that's a little bit more dulled down, so that maybe that would fit with like somebody who's maybe even in their 30s but really struggles naming their cognitions.
Very good. Well, thank you. I actually have to run. I have I have an 8:00, but I wanted to say thank you so much. This was really interesting, and I love hearing all about CBT. So I appreciate it. I just have to run. So
Talk to you.
good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, Judy.
Hi, Judy.
Bye.
So I'm going to step in because I want to acknowledge Matt's work and kind of give him a round of applause for his presentation. That was great, Matt. Very informative. We could go these kind of topics. You can go a mile deep and a mile wide, and still just scratch the surface. So the really complicated presentation, because you had to figure out not only what to put in, but what to leave out, and how to collapse it. So I think we can all appreciate that level of complexity and the amount of work you put into that. So thank you for expanding our knowledge. This will lead us all into different questions that come from after this. And Matt, I've recorded this presentation, by the way, so we'll see how it sounds. Maybe this is something that we can turn around and people can access later on if they want, and
Cool.
go back to pieces. There are links that everybody you should look into. There's links and there's resources that Matt's put together that you can use tomorrow, and
I'm gonna keep uploading stuff onto that, David, and whenever I see something useful, so that's gonna get big. So there's gonna be good stuff in there.
yeah, it's really, really helpful. And it's interesting in this coaching model. We all deal with the emotions first. We don't admit it. We try to take a very stoic behavioral perspective on that, but the truth is we're always tackling the emotions. And from when we schedule our appointments to what we bring up first, knowing we're not going to bring up the most triggering topic first, right? We're always trying to filter through that. So having some tools in our tool belt. I wrote down labeling your thoughts on here on my notes as being one of my biggest takeaways. Matt's going to really appreciate you guys sharing out even afterwards what your takeaways were from it. But labeling your thoughts with asking questions to probe those thoughts, I find to me is going to be is a good reminder of what I need to continue to do at the start of a session, asking questions like, what's on your mind? What's up? What are you thinking right now? And even asking those kind of very surface, mild questions can trigger that cognitive journey into their thinking, which I think if we do that 10 times during a session, we're building a really powerful muscle that's weak, and I think that's a win. But on that note, Jeremiah has joined this call. I'd like to give Jeremiah an introduction. I kind of did already, Mr. Baker, but he's on the call with us from his car because it's my fault. I did not call him and invite him to this call with some formality. I did invite him other ways, but that was under the assumption that he was actually getting my messages, and that was my fault. So I'm sorry about that, Mr. Baker. But
I appreciate the warm welcome.
So we'll do more of a formal introduction next time, Jeremiah. In the interest of everyone's time, I want to respect that. But it's good to get you for at least a couple minutes, and so you could at least get a face with the name and such. So on that note, any closing comments, remarks, anybody? Are we good?
Thank you, Matt. That was amazing.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Matt.
thank you, Matt.
Yeah, it was great.